The knife was already past the second guard before anyone noticed I had moved. I had been standing by the door for 6 hours, doing exactly what my contract said. Stand still, look serious, and do not touch anything that glows. That was the whole job description, and I had taken it because it paid more than sweeping docking bays back on the trade station. And because nobody else wanted to guard a Hive Queen who most species considered a joke target. Then the side panel hissed open, and a thin shape in dark plating slid through it. Every instinct I had spent my whole life sharpening woke up at once. My name is Daniel Cole. I used to tell people I was just a farmer from a small town, which was true, but it left out a few details. Like the fact that our farm had an electric fence rated for creatures 3 times the size of a bear, and that our idea of a bad storm could flatten a barn in under a minute. I never thought any of that mattered once I left Earth. Turns out, it mattered more than anything else I had ever learned. The assassin moved fast. Faster than the 2 guards standing near the throne room entrance, who were built like walking barrels of muscle and had 4 arms each. They saw the shape, and they hesitated just for a heartbeat, trying to figure out what kind of weapon it was carrying. I did not hesitate. I did not have time to be impressed by how fast it was because back home, fast was normal. Fast was a snake in the grass. A cat you did not see until it was already in the air. A gust of wind strong enough to throw a truck. Fast did not scare me. Fast just meant I needed to be faster. I stepped into its path before it reached the doorway, caught the wrist holding the blade, turned it away from the guards, and used its own speed against it. It hit the wall hard enough to crack the decorative tile. Then it was down, and it was not getting back up in a way that mattered anymore. The whole thing took maybe 4 seconds. For a moment, nobody in the hallway said anything. The 2 guards stared at me like I had grown a second head. Then one of them tapped the side of his helmet and called for cleanup, and the other one just kept staring, mandibles slightly open, which I had learned by then was the Hive equivalent of a dropped jaw. I picked up the knife I did not even need, checked the time, and went back to my post by the door because my shift was not over yet. That was the first time anyone in that palace realized they might have made a mistake in hiring me. It would not be the last. I want to back up a little because the fight was not really where the story starts. The story starts 3 weeks earlier in a hiring hall on a station called Vaughn's Reach, where a tired recruiter named Grace Whitfield was trying to fill a position nobody in her office understood. Grace worked for one of those staffing agencies that handled labor contracts across a dozen different star systems. Most of her clients were massive alien corporations or royal houses looking for cheap workers to do jobs their own citizens found beneath them. Guarding a minor Hive Queen was one of those jobs. The pay was low. The listed requirements were almost insulting. Must be able to stand for long periods. Must not require frequent breaks. Must tolerate low temperatures and strange smells. Species preference. Anything cheap and replaceable. I remember reading that listing and laughing because it sounded like a job posting for furniture. Grace told me later that almost nobody applied for it because most species considered guarding a small hive an easy way to get killed for very little money. I told her I grew up somewhere that killed people for free, so at least this job was paying me for the privilege. She laughed at that too, but I do not think she understood it was not really a joke. The queen who hired me was named Vesselin, and she ruled over a small hive that controlled exactly 1 moon and a handful of orbital stations. She was not powerful. She was not important. Not in the way the huge hive empires farther out in the galaxy were important. She hired a human guard because humans were cheap and because nobody on her council had ever actually met one. The rumors about Earth had been floating around known space for a long time. But most of the hive worlds treated those rumors the way people treat old ghost stories. Something to repeat at a party, not something to actually believe. A world where the weather tried to kill you. A world where the animals were built like walking weapons and the plants sometimes fought back too. A world where the dominant species survived not because it was the strongest or the fastest, but because it refused over and over again to simply lie down and die. Vesselin's advisors had heard those stories. They just assumed they were exaggerated the same way old sailor stories about sea monsters get exaggerated. So when they needed a cheap guard and a human application came across the list, nobody thought twice about it. They saw the price tag, saw the word human, and pictured something soft, slow, and easy to feel sorry for. I did nothing to correct that impression, mostly because nobody asked, and partly because I genuinely did not think it mattered. To me, I was just a guy who needed a job. I did not walk in bragging about growing up in a place that ate careless people for breakfast. Where I come from, you do not talk about that kind of thing. You just live it and you move on. And you try not to think too hard about the friends who did not make it to adulthood. The first few days on the job were quiet, almost boring. I stood by doors. I walked the perimeter of the Queen's private chambers. I ate whatever strange food the kitchen staff put in front of me, and the kitchen staff watched me eat it the way you might watch someone eat a live insect, since apparently some of what they served me would have been considered mildly toxic to most of their own guards. One of the younger workers, a translator named Auric, asked me once if it was true that humans slept lying down completely flat with their eyes closed for hours at a time. I told him yes, that was normal for us. He looked genuinely disturbed by that. The same way I might look disturbed if someone told me they slept hanging upside down in a cave full of open flames. To his people, lying flat and unconscious for hours was one of the most vulnerable things a creature could do. To me, it was just Tuesday night. It was little moments like that which slowly built a strange kind of tension in the palace. Not fear exactly. Not yet. More like confusion. The staff could not decide if I was pitiful or unsettling. And honestly, neither could I. Then came the attack in the hallway. The one I already told you about. And after that, the confusion started to shift into something else. Veselin called for my file that same night. I know this because Auric told me about it later, half amused and half nervous, like he was not sure whether to be impressed or worried on my behalf. Her advisors pulled my basic records, which were thin because human paperwork rarely says anything interesting. Species, human. Home world, Earth. Threat classification, unlisted. Unlisted because nobody in that region of space had ever bothered to properly classify Earth. They had heard the rumors, but rumors do not show up on official forms. One of her older advisors, a Hive elder named Sethri, apparently remembered enough old records to look deeper. He found references buried in ancient trade logs, warnings written by explorers who had visited Earth centuries ago and never gone back. Words like extreme predator density. Words like unstable weather patterns capable of leveling settlements. Words like population survives despite near-constant environmental threat. Cause unknown. Auric told me Sethri read that last part out loud twice, just staring at it before finally asking Veselin if she understood what she had actually hired. She had not. None of them had. I did not learn all of this until later, piece by piece, because nobody explained it to me directly. I was still just doing my job, standing by doors, walking my rounds, trying not to think too much about home. But I started noticing the way the guards looked at me differently. Less pity, more caution. A few of them started keeping a little more distance. The way you might step back from a dog you were not sure was friendly. The real turning point came about 10 days after the first attack, when a rival Hive faction decided Veselin's small territory was worth taking by force. I remember waking up to alarms, sharp and layered, the kind of sound designed to hit every frequency a Hive creature could hear. I was up and moving before I even fully understood what was happening, which again felt normal to me. Where I grew up, you learned to move first and ask questions later because the questions could wait, and the moving usually could not. The attackers came through the lower docking bay. A small strike team meant to slip in fast, take the Queen, and slip out before anyone organized a real defense. It might have worked against a normal security detail. It did not work against me. I am not going to pretend I did anything superhuman. I am not stronger than a Hive warrior. Not faster in a straight line. Not built with any of their natural advantages. What I had was something different. I had spent my whole life learning how to survive against things bigger, faster, and more dangerous than me, using the environment, using timing, using patience instead of panic. I used the narrow hallways against them, funneling them one at a time instead of letting them spread out. I used the low-gravity generators near the docking bay to throw off their balance. Their species was not built for sudden shifts in weight the way humans were, having dealt with unpredictable terrain throughout our entire evolutionary history. I stayed calm because staying calm was the one advantage nobody could take away from me. By the time the palace guards finally reorganized and arrived to help, the strike team was already finished. And Veselin was standing at the top of the stairs, completely safe, staring down at me with an expression I still cannot fully describe. It was not gratitude. Not exactly. It was something closer to realization. The look of someone who suddenly understood they had been standing next to something enormous the entire time and simply had not noticed until it moved. After that night, everything changed. My contract, originally written for someone considered cheap and replaceable, was quietly rewritten. My pay tripled. Then it tripled again a few months later. The advisors who used to whisper about the soft, strange creature at the door started asking me questions instead. Careful, respectful questions about Earth. About what other humans were like. About whether there were more of us willing to take similar work. Veselin herself asked me directly one evening why I never mentioned any of it. Why I let everyone believe I was just an ordinary hire. I told her the truth. Where I come from, surviving is not something you brag about. It is just something you do every single day until eventually it becomes so normal you forget other people might find it remarkable. She was quiet for a long moment after that. Then she said something I still think about. She said her people had spent generations telling stories about monsters from a death world. Monsters too dangerous to approach. And instead, she had accidentally hired one to guard her front door for the price of a common laborer. I told her that was probably the best deal she was ever going to make. She laughed at that. The real kind of laugh, not the polite kind. And from that day forward, whenever her advisors asked about expanding palace security, her answer was always the same. Find more humans, whatever the cost. I am still standing by that same door today. Still doing the same simple job I signed up for. Stand still. Look serious. Do not touch anything that glows. Nobody adds any warnings to my contract anymore about staying calm or holding back because, by now, everyone in that palace understands exactly what kind of guard they hired. They just never expected a Death World legend to come this cheap.